Hello, world. Welcome back to Comic Book News. I'm your old pal, Dan Shaheen. Today, well, we're going to talk about my all-time favorite graphic novel. It's From Hell by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell, but ironically, it's not my favorite Eddie Campbell comic. So I am just as pleased as punch to have the artist today, Eddie Campbell. He's going to come in here. He's going to talk about From Hell, the color, the master edition, the newly colorized edition of this awesome book. We'll talk about his work in Alec, Bacchus, aka Deadface, and all the other great stuff he's been up to. Hey, if you haven't already, consider clicking that subscribe button down there. There's a little button that says subscribe. You click that thing, oh man, you get access to the wonderful world of interviews I've done and the interviews I'm going to do. You can even click that little bell-shaped icon thingy, and it'll notify you when I've got live streams like this going on. So we want to talk to Mr. Campbell. We're going to take it today, not to the bookshelf, not to the back shelf, but where we usually go. But where are we going to go? Let's take it into the streets of Whitechapel, and we'll bring in today's guest, Eddie Campbell. Right now, let's bring him in. Hey, Eddie, welcome to Comic Book News.
Hello, Dan. Lovely to be here.
Great. Thanks for making the time. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Where else have I got to go? There's nowhere to go. Everywhere's closed.
That's true. Now, this is a good question. I sort of thought you would be coming from Australia, and I didn't realize till lately that you've moved to the States. Is that right?
Yes, I'm in Chicago now.
Is that's permanent, and that's your?
Yes, that's permanent.
Okay, great. Are you a U.S. citizen?
No.
Okay.
I've never
Any plans to become one?
No. For the last 36 years, I've never lived anywhere I can vote.
No?
No. I'm a visitor. I was a visitor for over 30 years in Australia.
And so what brought you to the United States? What made you make that change? Originally from England,
I was back
to Australia. Yeah.
I was back in England for just over a year. In 2016, I married Audrey Niffenegger, the famous novelist. I wrote a couple of articles about her way back, and when I started my blog way back in 2006. So it didn't come out of nowhere. It was I'd been watching her from afar.
And so you pursued and had to make the move to the States, right? Long distance romance is not gonna happen.
Well, my first wife divorced me. She'd had enough. She'd had enough of living in a comic strip, and so here I am. I've lived in 3 different continents in the last 10 years. I've been married and divorced, and lived in 3 different continents.
Right, and in that whole time, sort of lived in this fictional universe as well. You just brought up the comic strip, Alec, your original strip, and how that sort of just went from a sort of semi-autobiographical to straight autobiographical. Can you talk about that?
It was always autobiographical. I was more circumspect at the beginning. I thought you had to change names and things like that. And then I became more confident, and I realized that nobody was ever going to read it. No, I used to worry about people seeing themselves in there. And then I realized that nobody was ever going to find out. And then years later, after From Hell and everything, everybody started to find out. And I thought, oh no. They all started to recognize themselves and contact, find out that I was on the internet and contact me.
And I mean, did you, when you were writing those things, did you ever imagine something like this would exist?
Yeah, in fact, I did. I thought I'd be dead before it happened. I thought it would be posthumous. The collected works of the deceased Eddie Campbell. It's
what I love about this book is that it's really the connective tissue between your other books. I mean, you're working on From Hell all throughout this, as well as on Bacchus books, and you're referencing the art and the writers and the production and everything throughout. It's a really engaging experience in a way that autobiographical comics aren't always. So kudos to that.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I thought about that the first time I put Alan Moore in the book. I thought, is this being a bit self-referential, you know, referring to the comic book business and my collaborator? Should I fictionalize it, you know, for the general populace? And then I thought, Alan Moore is probably a bigger and more interesting character than Batman. So what the hell?
You might be right about that. Let's see. I think we got some. Oh yeah, we've got Mr. Moore right here.
What the hell is he wearing? How did you get him in a t-shirt? Did you
let alone smiling, right? So this is one of the rarer Alan Moore pictures. Nowadays, we're maybe more used to him, I don't know, like this.
Yeah, that's Alan.
And we got, oh my gosh, oh, wait a minute. And we can put you right in here too, pal, because tell me a little bit.
That's a good photo. I'm looking very film noir in there. Look at the shadows.
I love it. When do you think that picture was taken?
That was taken in Angoulême in a hallway in a big old building. I can't remember what it was or why I'm still carrying a cocktail. I was in a corridor somewhere, so I don't know why I've still got a drink in my hand.
I think I have the real picture here somewhere. Wait a minute. Here, yeah, here it is. Let me shrink down here.
That was 15 years ago, I think. I can't remember.
So, but basically, you started doing just kind of auto-bio comics, right? I mean, that was your thing from the very beginning. Is that right?
Yeah. I was searching for something authentic, something real. Comics were then and still are about cosmic events, and I don't like that. In that last Avengers movie, I loved the bit with Professor Hulk, but I totally fell asleep during that whole cosmic battle at the end. I hate that stuff.
Well, it's funny though that you say that, because ultimately, I mean, you did write a superhero. I mean, when I look at Bacchus and its origins and kind of the way that you started with it, it really is it's your version of superheroes, right? Am I wrong about that?
That was me trying to do an American comic. I had decided that the only way forward to make a living out of this was to do an American style comic. Americans think that all comics are like that, but every nation in the world has got its own comics tradition, whether it's manga or fumetti or tebio, or that's in Italy and Spain, and they all look different. They all, bande dessinée. they all have their own history and their own way of doing things and their own subjects, their own ideas. But anyway, it was necessary to do an American style comic to make any headway. This was in 1986, and that was my idea. It was kind of like an American comic at first, and then it became like a Campbell. It became another Campbell, an Eddie Campbell comic.
Yes, I don't think it would have interested me as much as where I first saw it. I think was probably in Dark Horse Presents, and I think it was Doing the Islands, and it was those short stories, each sort of hearkening back to real mythology, and then bringing it with this subtlety of presentation that really like sucked me in like nothing else.
See, that's what I mean. There were all these. There were numerous anthologies around at the time, where you could land little short story comics, 7-8 pages, and so I was trying to do this great big complicated mythically continuous thing, but doing it in different magazines. It was like jumping from one to the other, and anybody trying to follow the story would have, I mean, each of the components were self-contained, but they all made a big story, and anybody trying to follow that story would have been challenged. Many people joked about it to me later that they had trouble finding one or two of the parts that appeared in more obscure places. But Dark Horse Presents was the main venue, my main venue for a few years. But those kind of anthology comics I don't think they exist anymore, or maybe they do. I haven't been paying attention. I haven't been looking for them. The way the market works now is completely different. When you arrive, you've got to have your 600-page graphic novel ready to roll. You have to arrive with your 600-page. I meet poor wee helpless students wrestling with the colossal task of a 300-page book, and they've had nothing else in print yet. They haven't had the opportunity to thoroughly embarrass themselves, which is a healthy thing, before putting out a huge book. I don't think it's a good thing. I wish there were places for, you have to go straight from Twitter to a 300-page graphic novel with no stops in between.
It is a shame. The anthologies, they still exist. The art comics anthology. Eric Reynolds over at Fantagraphics still, he puts out his anthology, and there's a couple of other ones, but yeah, it's not a format that's super commercially viable, I think, is the bottom line, because you have such a variety of artists going into it that it's a tough sell month to month.
Yeah. Well,
I'll say once the Eddie Campbell stuff dropped out of Dark Horse Presents, I stopped reading it. I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah, it was a funny thing. I wasn't even in every issue. I would just do a story and then phone up Randy Stradley and say, "Have you got space for another one?" And he said, "Yes, of course," and I'd send it off. So you might find me in every third issue or something like that. And in between,
I was reading during that Eyeball Kid run, though, I remember, and they were coming out at a pretty regular clip.
Well, that was in. They had another anthology called Cheval Noir, and we had the Eyeball Kid in there for 8 consecutive weeks. That one. As I say, there was more than one anthology. I can't remember the names of the other ones now. This is 30 years ago.
Well, that's why I'm super glad these volumes exist now, because otherwise, man, to track down Cheval Noir and Dark Horse Presents and let alone a copy of what? Wait a minute, I got what? How many copies of Bacchus #1? Do you have a copy of this still?
Yes, not here. I've got a copy of it in London, I think. All my stuff is strewn and awake behind me. I haven't seen it for a while. He looks a bit feeble there. I redesigned Bacchus so that he was a much more square-jawed character. See, that's another thing about working on the big thing, and if it's coming out as you do it, you're about 50 pages in before you've decided what your hero looks like. And then you have to go. It's good to be able to have the chance to go back and fix it.
I think, can we take a look inside? Do you mind if we take a peek inside of this these Bacchus anthologies real quick? We can talk about it.
Yeah.
Right here in the $1 Million Comics Camp. So I've got too many Eddie Campbell bricks here. Let's see. So we got Bacchus Volume 1. Let's just go into look at the early stuff for a second. Right, and I see cartooning, like storytelling wise and cartooning wise, you were extremely developed early on. I'm just going to say this stuff is really readable.
Everything's in the same place, but as I say, every time I've reissued this, I've gone in and tweaked it here and there. But, in fact, you showing it to me now makes me want to lean in and fix a couple of things. Like, it's hard to look at your work that old without wanting to change it. You know, you see everything that's wrong with it. I want to change that year. That year looks terrible.
Well, and you got the chance to do that, right? Like From Hell. So was that the sort of the dream for you to be able to go back and make a master edition, a final pass?
That was the real thing. It was 20 years since we'd wrapped up From Hell, and From Hell was always in black and white, and in the interim, I had started to. I couldn't envision it in color back then, primarily because we couldn't afford it. And it was Steve Bissett was printing it into blue. And Steve Bissett's just a guy like me. He's just an artist, self-publishing. Trying to do it in color was just a complication that we didn't need.
This is a first printing from Top Shelf, original cover, or not. Of course, it originally came out serialized, as you were talking about.
That's one of mine. I published that myself. That one.
Eddie
Campbell Comics.
Yeah, you're right. This is previous to the Top Shelf acquisition of the publishing rights, that is.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I love this back cover more. As much as I like the master edition, we didn't get this.
Yeah. That's a long
This
time.
is the volume I've kept with me since it came out, right?
Yeah.
I read it. I read some of those Taboo issues. I picked them up in my college years, and I said, what is this thing? And I read, the early first chapters and was so just ready to read this story. And then when it was finally actually released, it was almost like a miracle to get a book this amazing, this meaty, but this just chock full of everything there is to love about comics. It's hard for me to explain how important this book was to me personally. Obviously, it's a big hit, adapted into a movie of debatable quality. I want you to talk about that a little bit, please, because
the movie,
you wrote a lot about it in Alec, about the production. You seem to enjoy the production of the movie and were treated well.
Yeah. It was a movie, If they'd done it like the book, it would have been a better movie. Not because we're geniuses, but because what they did was very ordinary. They said let's make it into a whodunit, which made it was Touchstone, which is Disney. I think Disney said it must be a whodunit. And the very first thing that Alan and I decided was that we're not going to do this as a whodunit, because that turns murder into a game. It turns it into You know, what's the board game Clue?
Uh-huh.
Who killed whom with the blunt instrument in the conservatory? It turns it into a game. With
Yes, Professor Grape with the Liston knife in the carriage house.
yes, which cheapens the horror and the terror of murder. And if they'd just done it like the book, they could have had a villain of the quality of Hannibal Lecter before Hannibal Lecter had arrived in movies.
Okay, so this is what's always killed me about that. The disconnect here is that, okay, you've got filmmakers arguably who are very talented, and you've got the backing, you've got the money, you've got this book, which is an amazing, forget about a comic, it's just an amazing book and concept and take on the Ripper mythos. It's not even about the murder, it's about the superstructure that has formed psychically around the Ripper murder. Like, it's so crazy to me. Like, I can't see them adapting it fully in that way, but to completely jettison the truly like cinematic or horrific elements that you guys captured in this book just seemed like a crime to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, what can you do?
Yeah, well, that aside, I'm glad that they brought this book to attention and to prominence, right? And let you the demand to be what I wonder is, where did the demand for the colorization come from? Was that from you always wanting to do it that way, or commercial interests, or?
It was my idea. The publishers had the general idea of wanting to do something with From Hell. Now that it was 20 years since it was first collected in one book, we thought we should do something with that and put it out in some new way. You've always got to, with a book, it's like a garden. You've got to maintain it. You can't just let it lie. You've got to constantly, periodically be thinking about what new thing can we do with this to keep it alive, to keep it blooming. And
I thought that if anyone else had done the colorization, like when I heard this announced, I immediately picked up the first couple of chapters that were serialized, but then decided to wait for the collected. And I said, I don't want to see somebody, just like I don't want to see a colorized Casablanca or Citizen Kane, right? I wasn't sure I wanted to see this until I heard, that it was you. It was as if, Orson Welles went back and got to do the color remaster of Citizen Kane.
I was looking at Alice in Wonderland recently. The artist John Tenniel drew Alice in Wonderland in the 1860s, and its sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass, came out in 1872. 20 years later, they put out an edition with 20 color plates, and Tenniel added the color to his own illustrations for this new edition. So that's the idea of wanting to colorize your work is not a new thing. There was a colorized version of Key Largo that I always loved. I thought it was a great film. I think
it's an art just like coloring of comics, right? And I'm sure there are great movie colorizers and hack ones as well.
Yeah, there's very much a reddish tinge that I'm receiving. I don't know if it's my computer.
Yeah, it's my lighting.
Or your lighting there, because I've wrestled with this. When I put out this, we put this out in 10 parts before we gathered it together.
Yes.
And there was this reddish tinge and everything. All the grays had a pink thing in them, and I worked hard to eliminate that for the final presentation here in the big book.
I can control my color temperature of my lighting a little bit here. That might be that sometimes is what causes the issue.
I'm seeing the problem all over again. I want to go in there and fix it. So,
oh man, that's not what I was hoping for, to do. What I really wanted to point out that I love about it was that some people thought that, you know, because of the subject matter and the era, that it was particularly suited to black and white. And what I really love about it is the fact that there probably was a lot less color, a lot less saturated color just in the normal environment there. And just to see the little splashes of color in London, etc., throughout, it gives you really a more realistic feel for what those people were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. The advertisements, the candies, and things of that nature. Now, of course, there's the viscera, the bloody parts, and this is what everyone was sort of like expecting. We'll get to some bloodier parts a little bit later, but I loved the process that you use, the subtlety of the colors. Can you tell us a little bit about your process for colorizing these pages? And did you have access to all of the original artwork to do this?
No. I colorized the files that we made from the negatives in 2006 when we first digitalized the whole thing. Which was a horrifying story. Our printer went bankrupt, and we had nothing to shoot from. We had to get the negatives out from under the nose of the who is it holds it over you when you're bankrupt, whatever. We had to get the negatives on a pallet and get them to another place, which cost us more money. But anyway, we had a digital place scan the negatives, and we finally had digital files, and that's only 15 years ago.
And so then you did all the color yourself digitally, purely digitally?
Yeah. It's all in Photoshop. I painted it in Photoshop. My own way.
See, this is not coming through as well. My saturation is it's a little too dark, but you've got some nice, lovely moments with lighting, especially though.
Go back a few pages there. See, go back to a bit. Keep going back. I'll say stop. Keep going back. They keep going. It wasn't just keep going back. It wasn't just keep going. Right here. Just back. No, but the other way. Back the other way. One more the other way.
Yeah.
One more the other way. Now, at the top of that page, just next to your head, the top, just above on the right. It wasn't just. It wasn't just the color. There are 3 panels at the top there that don't exist in the black and white version. They're completely new drawings. And really, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fix a lot of problems. Alan had written that in a certain way, and I had originally drawn it differently for whatever reason at the time.
Oh yes.
And going back now, I thought that there really
quite a difference.
There really was no reason why I shouldn't have done that exactly the way Alan first described it. So that's one of the more obvious things that I've changed.
At what percentage? How often would you say you did that in the course of this book? It's an over 300-page book.
Well, I changed something in virtually every page, but sometimes it might be just the size of a head. Because
I mean, this is completely relettered. It's the same dialogue. It looks like.
No, it's not relettered. I kept the same lettering, but those are completely new pictures.
Oh, you just moved the bubbles around a little bit.
I took out the black. Well, I had to separate the lettering from the pictures to begin with, because the lettering is always in a higher resolution. And in most comics, the black line is also on a high resolution. But in this, it isn't. In this, the black line is on the color plate, and the lettering is at 1200 DPI. We're getting into technicalities there.
Well, but you're saying these choices that you made were based more to go back to the original script and capture more of what was described in the script?
Yeah.
Got it. And what a chance, man, to be able to do that and to be able to put this out in a new format that, one, somebody like me, who's literally has read the black and white edition 20 times, it gives me a reason not just to buy it and have it, but to read it, right? There's no way I would have caught that. Even as many times as I've read it, there's no way I would catch a change kind of as subtle as that, I would say. So definitely gave it a value in the rereading for me, and hopefully for new readers too. Do you think there's something about the accessibility of color is going to allow this to reach out to people who maybe totally rejected it? Just like there's people that won't watch a black and white movie, there's people that won't read a black and white comic.
There is that. I hope.
And I mean, how many more of these things could you hope to sell, though? How many copies of From Hell all told would you say have been sold?
We've been selling the same number every month for over 20 years. It spiked slightly at the time of the movie, but otherwise it's been a dependable thing that people want to read.
That's amazing. That's the hardest thing of all to achieve. Right, it is a perennial, like it's a perennial, and as much as Watchmen is revered and talked about and written about, I feel like From Hell is not explored as much and definitely not given as much credit, especially some of the really lofty philosophical ideas that you guys got into.
Yes, it's not simply just hold that. You probably can't see it, but the one at the top of that page is in fact, the other page there. Go back again. No, the previous one, that one there, that picture at the top there. If you look at that in the old edition, there's a lot of rethinking about the technicality of how a coach works. That's not that. One of the problems was I don't know that much. 30 years ago, I didn't know that much of it. I'd say I would have drawn this in 1990, 30 years ago. I really didn't know that much about coaches or how they worked or the weight of them or the amount of exertion that it would take a horse to pull that thing there. But this time going through, in the intervening 30 years, every time there's been a coach on a movie, I've looked at it hard. See that there's a lot of work in just making that a much more convincing object.
Yeah. Just the weightiness of the horse pulling the carriage.
Yeah, and just how close the carriage would be to the ground. I had it too high off the ground. In the old one there. Things like that, and also the man is sitting too high up. The man should be sitting much lower down, which you can see fixed, and the wheels have been properly aligned. Things like that. It's essentially the same ink. I just twisted it and moved it and skewed it and distorted it until it's the same ink on the page, just moved around to be more convincing. That I haven't redrawn that picture. It's just I've taken the components and moved them. But
well, I'm gonna say you have. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
It's one of the things I most wanted to do. Because every time I look at the old book, I groan and I can't look at it. I wanted to make a book that I could look at without groaning every time. Like flip a couple more pages forward, for instance. Like keep going. Keep this page here on the left, just there on the left, is greatly changed. compare that to the.
This is my favorite thing about having this $1 Million Comics Cam, is because sometimes I'm showing stuff to guys like you and guys like Pat Mills and others that they haven't even looked at their own work in so long, and they love it, and they get caught up right into it. I love that part. Okay. Oh yeah, quite a difference.
So I rejigged that whole. I just rethought that page. Part of the problem was I didn't have a photograph of the location, and getting photographs is easier now in these Google days. Back then, I was in Australia. I can't even remember where that's supposed to be. Is it London Fields, which is a big open park? And I'm not sure how it would have looked in Gull's time. I think it was a bit of wasteland that hadn't been developed or turned into a park yet. I don't know. I can't remember. But that was one that that needed to be fixed. Go forward keep going a couple of pages. There's another one.
Absolutely.
Like this next page here. Keep turning there.
Oh,
I think there's one before that. No, there's one before that. I think you've turned. Have you turned 2 pages?
I might have.
Did you turn 2? See this panel on the right there, the page on the right, is one that I'm much happier with. I don't know if it's even noticeable that I've done a lot of work on that compared to the old one. I don't know. Have you got the old one there?
Yeah, let's see. Let's check it out.
But
chapter 4, page 3. Can I say thank you so much for putting chapter and page numbers on these things? And the footnotes as well.
Have they got that on the color one? I can't see from here, but for a long time that was missing.
Let's see. I got it right here.
Yeah. If you took that stuff out, I realized I said to him, the footnotes don't work if you take all that stuff out. I don't think it's obvious there, but there's a lot of reworking of the coach and the horse there.
Even the perspective on the steeple itself.
Yeah.
A little bit different. Maybe
I've straightened that steeple. Things like that. It was tricky to do, but and going on a couple more pages. If you go on a couple pages,
sure. Yeah.
Keep going. Real happy with that picture on the left. I think the big picture on of the church there, that really came out right. Yeah, that worked. The color really helps that one.
I was gonna say what I like about it is the same thing I like about when they've colorized old black and white pictures from those eras, and they use sort of algorithms to make it more realistic. It's just that sense of like, we feel like everything was black and white back then, but we never get the true sense of what these people saw.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is the scene, right? To me, this was what ultimately when I got to the carriage ride through London.
Hold it there. Now hold it there.
Yeah.
See on the right there at the bottom, I was never able to get a photograph of that building back 30 years ago. And if you compare it now, I kind of fudged it in the old one by having Gull just ride past the gate. And you're looking through the gate, which is all right from a symbolic point of view. But there's a completely new drawing in there.
Oh my gosh, you completely flipped.
Yeah.
The camera to show it. Wow, that's great.
So there's things like that. There's things like that all the way through the book. Every now and then as I say, that was done because I couldn't get a photo of that building at the time. We didn't have Google in 1990. In fact, I didn't have a computer in 1990. If I couldn't find it in paper at the library, then I had to make something up.
And do you still maintain your scrap files and stuff? You had extensive paper files.
No, I threw all that out a long time ago. I don't even have a dictionary anymore because I had a huge big Webster's dictionary it cost me $100, but I threw that out one day. It was a sad day, but it was the end of an era.
Yes.
Nowadays, it's easier just to look up a word on the internet.
I used to collect reference books, all kinds of obscure reference books, and then one day I just realized I'm carrying these things around with me, and they just don't have the utility they once did.
Yeah.
So, really great stuff. Is it true you took a ride with Alan Moore through London along the route?
And he sent me the photographs. Jamie Delano drove Alan around London. He was the driver for that occasion. I think Alan took about 64 photographs, counting, all counted, of the various. If you go back, go back one. If you go back one, just go back. That in the middle of that, that's in the middle of that page there that you're looking at. There's another. That's a completely new picture. In the original book, the attentive reader will notice that Alan had originally written that scene as one page, and I had turned it into 2 pages. And going over this, I thought, I didn't need to turn that into 2. I was just being a smart Alec.
Way different. Way different. This is amazing. I'm so glad to have you walk me through, because I wouldn't have caught these, because these are not things that are change the story or alter the storytelling dramatically.
So I collapsed.
A lot of work that you put into this, the redo.
I collapsed 2 pages into 1, which is the way Alan originally wrote it. I just felt that the balance was wrong, and so that middle panel there of London, what do you call it? The Tower of London. That's a completely new drawing. Because I didn't. I had in the original, Alan had Gull Cross Tower Bridge, except that when I came to draw it, I found that Tower Bridge wasn't open yet. It was still being built at that time. So he couldn't go over Tower Bridge. I sent him the long way around. And to do that, I had to spread the dialogue over 2 pages. And coming back to it now, I thought there was a simpler solution. He could have just looked at it from across the river. And I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to break it into 2 pages. I was just showing off.
Okay, I'm going to ask you though, Eddie, how important was it? How important was it to preserve that detail, like at all, in the sake of the story? Is there a time when you would be willing to just say, like, we'll just have them cross the bridge because it's, you know, better, easier storytelling or whatever?
Just yeah. The Tower Bridge is a great example of it. It was built to have that medieval look of the tower. So it was built with medieval features. And so it's easy to think that Tower Bridge is much older than it looks. But it's a brilliant feat of Victorian engineering. It could only have been built in the 1890s because the bridge rises. They couldn't have a bridge that size rise in medieval times. I mean, a drawbridge was hard enough, you know, where they pull it up with a chain and a big wheel. But Tower Bridge owes everything to Victorian engineering, and so as you can see, I've fudged up. I just used the balloons to cover the fact that they're across the river, and we have to say, and moved on instead of drawing attention to Alan's oversight, which I thought was a rotten thing to do.
But I mean, how many people who read this, Eddie, realistically on the planet would pick up on that detail? Seriously, like, how many people would it be?
We knew. I think, in fact,
yeah.
In that second Sherlock Holmes film, you know, with Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
They have the huge battle scene on the bridge. It's on the bridge which is being built. And I think they're using our research on discovering that bridge was still was not yet open. So they had that huge battle on the bridge, which was still under construction.
These are amazing. I mean, the carriage ride scene,
That's
so
my
amazing.
That's my favorite chapter, because you can see from that what we're
Yeah.
getting there is the sun is going down, the sun is setting, and we see the light of the setting sun cast on the face of the church just before it disappears altogether. And so it's a 40-page, 34th, I can't remember, whatever it is, chapter that starts. You can see in the top there on the right, the setting sun is just catching the top of St. Paul's before it casts St. Paul's into
Very beautiful,
into the shadow of dusk. The light is just hitting the toppermost reaches of the cathedral there. But it gave me the opportunity to just imagine a trip around Victorian London in one day, from sun up to sundown, and to work out how the light would look at the different times of day and in different situations. And the sun disappears at one point, and we have rain for a couple of pages. So it changes in light, changes in weather, because light always looks different when everything's wet. After everything's been soaked, everything smells different and looks different. And I was able to immerse myself in Victorian London and what it would be like in London. And for me, that's my favourite chapter. I know what was happening in the story was of less interest to me. I just loved the idea of the challenge of that. It was an impressionistic trip through London where I could just think about light and rain.
Well, it's a visual tour de force on top of, though, the amazing history lesson. And I want and just right here, okay. So this is the line. This is the moment. This is the most important line to me of all time I've ever read in a comic book. Okay, for a young impressionable lad, the one place gods inarguably exist is in our minds, where they're real beyond refute in all their grandeur and monstrosity. And it was in this moment, reading this, that took me and flipped me from being what I thought was just an atheist into something else, like really understanding what gods were. That
line is the line where Alan says that he first started thinking about magic. That one line is what sent Alan on his journey into the world of magic and myth,
really,
and psychogeography and so on. I think with From Hell, he'd launched himself into psychogeography without really having planned to or thought about it. Just that chapter there, and that line in that chapter is where Alan Moore became a magician. That one line was like the angels in heaven were blowing the trumpets and singing as Alan's epiphany. It came crashing down on his head, and he was uplifted to a new sphere and saw everything differently from that moment onwards.
It had the same effect on me.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the truth, because it's not until you, and it's only when you grasp this that you can put yourself into the mind of, say, like a fundamentalist Christian, or somebody who I would have just no way to understand their worldview. But if I can understand that their God to them is as real as anything could ever be, then it absolutely explains what, seemed unexplainable.
For anybody who's interested, I got that observation from Alan in the interview that I did with him, that is printed in A Disease of Language, which is the book which is still available. It was first published in 2006, but it brought together my two adaptations of his magical works, so that the book consists of The Birth Call, Snakes and Ladders, plus the interview that I did with him. It was for my magazine, actually, but it's in the book there, and that is where he cites that moment as being. I think I asked him, I said, what turned you on to magic? And he said, actually, it was that very panel. And he told the story.
I have to think that it reverberated and had the same effect on many people. Call it what you will, magic, collective unconsciousness, just understanding of the true nature of that man created God, but that doesn't mean that God does not have dominion over man in that way. It's just an amazing, pretty deep concept to come from a funny book, Eddie.
Yeah.
So at this point, I mean, did it strike you at the moment when you wrote it and you read it as that important of a moment, or were you just more immersed in the
no, it didn't mean anything to me. I shot right past it. I had no epiphany. I was too busy drawing. I had to get my pages in. I'm just the artisan. I'm the hired hand.
Well, because I think in a lesser writer's hands, this line would have been like on a splash page or something, and the guy would have been screaming it from the mountaintop, or or something. He's just sort of casually tossing it off to a guy who probably doesn't even understand it during lunch. But it's such a profound moment. I don't know. I'm so glad that you told me how important it was to Alan Moore, because it's just the amazing moment. So I want to talk about, we could talk about From Hell all day. I think we should talk a little bit more about it for sure. But one thing I wanted to say before I forget is that we'll talk about your latest book about money.
Well, that's 10 years old. Oh,
right.
The latest one.
The hardcover. I just ordered. I'd never read it before. I just ordered it, and it's all about the history of money. Lovely, horrible stuff. 2012. I know it's been a while, but like that's one of your later works that slipped by me completely. I never even heard about it until recently.
In order to do that book, my favorite part of the book is the second half, in which I travel to the island, to the South Sea island of Yap, to study the stone money, the tropical island.
Yes. So the giant wheels, right? The giant stone wheels.
Yeah. I wanted the whole history of it. I wanted to be there on site and talk to the people and get the story. So it's a piece of on the spot journalism. It's a beautiful little island, and a plane flies in twice a week and flies out again. And I think there's a plane coming the other way, goes in twice a week as well. And I think this population of 10,000 people or something, and it's got one road that goes all the way around the rim of the island, and it's all jungle otherwise. And there's all these huge big stone wheels parked around the island, and these stone wheels are things of immense value to the people of Yap, to the Yapese, and they didn't make them on the island. They had to go and make them, and they had to go and quarry them from the island of Palau, which is the next island down in Micronesia, which is the name of the group of islands. And they had to go there on their outrigger canoes, and they had to strip these discs. They weren't huge discs at this point. They only became huge discs when they had steamships coming. they mooched rides on steamships, but that's
inflation. That's Yap inflation, I guess.
That's Yap inflation. They traded their work in the coconut farms for rides on the boats, but they'd still be like 3 or 4 feet wide, and they'd put a big wooden pole through them and have wooden floats, and they tow these huge, 2 or 3 feet wide, but they'd have several of them all together, and they tow them back from Palau, which is, I can't remember the distance. Is it 20 miles or 200 miles? It's an incredible distance away, and often they wouldn't make it. They would lose their valuables on the way back. But the great economists of the 20th century have referred to the Yapese and their concept of money, because sometimes they would lose a particularly beautiful stone at the bottom of the sea, but they would still be able to claim it as a valuable. They would still be able to trade on it, because enough people were on the trip in other canoes that had seen it go down, and they were able to live on the fame of having made a beautiful piece, and the piece could still be owned and exchanged. There are arguments about whether this is exactly so, but it's a beautiful idea, and the great economists of the 20th century like to refer to Yap as a place that discovered the idea that money doesn't have to be in your pocket.
Right.
That money can be over there, far away, and you can still have it. You know, it can be in the Chase National Bank, and you never.
Our entire economy is built on that. The entire world's economy is built on that.
You don't have to ever go there, but you know your money is there. You know it's being looked after over there. It could just as well be at the bottom of the sea.
Well, I love that concept, and then I thought it deserves updating. I've got this on order. I haven't read it. I'm like, an Eddie Campbell book I have not read, but it needs updating for Bitcoin. When I heard you wrote that book, I had to ask if you knew anything about cryptocurrency and how you thought that tied in, if at all.
I'm out of my depth there, completely out of my depth. I don't understand it. I don't have enough brainwave. What was it? Broad bandwidth.
Brain bandwidth.
I couldn't even remember the words. Never mind, have any of it. I don't have enough bandwidth left to contain that. I'm going to die with it being a mystery. Popeye?
I'm telling you, the Yap. There might be a metaphor there. There's an analog with the boats and the.
I'm sure
proof of work and all the different algorithms. Like it's almost going back to that concept. Anyway, I thought I wanted to put it right on that.
I should also say that it sounds like it's a very learned book about money, but it's the usual Campbell tomfoolery. Every chapter is funny. So
much like history of humor.
I'm thinking I've gone serious.
Well, but much like history of humor, right? I loved Egomania. Okay, I was into the 2 issues or whatever that came out, and it was a real. I thought when that magazine ended, maybe you would continue the project and publish history of humor, but it ended up being a part of the Alec collection. So I do have it in a final, collected form.
Yeah, it's in there. But the idea of it became the fate of the artist, which is currently out of print, but we're bringing it back into print next year with Top Shelf. And I'm working on a new book that is a sequel to The Fate of the Artist.
Oh. Which was put out by Top's First Second, right?
Yeah. We're putting it out again from Fate of the Artist. They might be in the same book. We haven't worked out yet whether the Fate of the Artist and its sequel should be in the same book yet. We're working that one out. But it's a book about the COVID year. It's a book about surviving the COVID year.
Great.
It's a book where we all wear masks.
Back to your superhero.
And the prospects for skullduggery that this raises when everybody's wearing a mask. And we can't be entirely sure that you're who you said you are. The title of the book is The Second Fake Death of Eddie Campbell by Eddie Campbell. As presented by Eddie Campbell.
What was the first fake death?
The Fate of the Artist. Which is why this is a sequel.
I see. Gotcha. What was amazing about this stuff was, I don't know, it's the deftness, the subtlety of the drawings, and the ability to sustain interest in some fairly mundane details about your life sometimes. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, I think the secret about a comic, I've come to realize the secret about a comic is that it's not happening somewhere else. Like it's being made on this page here. It's all, even if there's a photograph, even if you use a photograph of somewhere else, or if you base somebody else on a photo, if you base your people on photos, the reader must think that this is the illusion that's to be created is that the story is being made on this page here. It's not referring to a story that happened somewhere else. So that while you're saying, I'm writing about my life, in a way, yeah, but that's incidental. You're reading about some other life on the page. There's some other life happening on the page here where lunatic and crazy things can be. Like, go on a few pages till you come to the Snoozer.
Yeah.
For instance. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, I'll just keep flipping. Here we go. I loved. By the way, your time doing courtroom sketches too. I loved your scripts about that.
I did.
Really loved this stuff.
As I'm saying though, you can refer to something that
here we go.
You can refer to something that happened, but it must not matter that happened. You could just as easily have made it up. See, there's the Snoozer. Now, he doesn't exist. He's not really there. He's only there in the comic. The comic is being created on this page. And whatever he represents visually is a thing that is only happening in that comic. And a thing that cartoons and comics can do. They can take complicated things and represent them visually.
Yes.
So that it's even From Hell is not really telling us about something that happened somewhere else.
Right.
Ostensibly, it's about the Whitechapel murders. But what it really is that Alan Moore and I are creating a vision of Victorian London, which may not be the real Victorian London. And Gull is not the real Dr. Gull. Everything that's happening is only happening on that page. And it's only happening for you while you're reading it. And that must be the illusion that is created. That has to be the illusion that we create. I was reading a comic recently it was a romance comic actually, but who was the artist? Lee Ames, I think, was the artist. I can't remember why I got into this. It was on the Digital Comic Museum. One thing had led to another. I was looking at this story, and it was very well drawn because this guy wrote books on how to draw. He wrote some of those how to draw books, but all the time I'm looking at it, I'm thinking the girl in this has posed for him, whether it's his model or whether it's his wife or his girlfriend. And every expression is an expression that he has caught just so, perhaps with a camera, probably with a camera, because you can only catch expressions like that with a camera. And that's what photographic is. Photographic isn't being real. Photographing means doing what a camera does and the specific things that a camera does. And I came away thinking more about his photo session with the lady than I did about the story or what was happening on the page. What was happening on the page was a reflection, not of the story, but of this photo session.
Yeah.
And that was all I could think about was the photos. And I thought, in some way, he's failed because he's made me think about his photographs instead of the reality that he was creating anew on the page.
Have you been reading any of Dave Sims' Glamour Puss stuff or the Raymond Chandler?
Dave, what do you think about this particular story here? Wait a minute. Go back a page. Go back a page. No, back a page. This is the origin of the Snoozer.
Yes.
By the time you get to the page, you see the bottom of this page. Go to the bottom of this page. There you see. Now, this is the origin of the snoozer. Bruce Wayne was sitting alone in his study, and this beastie flew through the window, and he says, "That's what I must become. I must become a frightening species of the humid tropical night." And I've actually copied the pictures. don't tell DC, but I've hand copied the image of Bruce there, and he goes down to his shed. I don't say it's Bruce, of course. You've got to recognise him.
Sure.
And if anybody asks, I didn't say it to you either. It's a completely fictitious adventure, and he makes a costume for himself, and he puts on those marigolds, those pink kitchen gloves, and that's it. And he goes down the street, and he goes round the palm tree in my house, and he climbs up, and he goes in the window, and he comes in my bedroom, and he pulls down the sheets to reveal me. And if you switch there, I go, and then he sticks his finger up.
Truly the source of all humor, right? As you go into in your history of humor.
My wife later said my wife later said to me, she said, you know, this is about the prostate examination. This is about your fear around the prostate. What they do to you, what the doctor does to you when you get your prostate examination. And she said, you know, you're going to have to turn yourself in.
You use the snooter after this, or you use him throughout sort of symbolically. What's your take on, what does the snooter represent?
It represents my midlife crisis, I suppose. Because, as I say, it's a comic. And in a comic, you have to do comic things. You can't be boring. You can't be boring about money or about your midlife crisis like ordinary people who are not cartoonists. You have to find some way of making a comic out of it.
I think because it really is about the relationship of the elements on the page.
Yeah.
Right. And then having those, I guess, coalesce into some meaning in the reader's mind.
Every panel is a composition, and every page is an arrangement of compositions that must make a super composition. And every page is you wake up in that day and you have to live that challenge anew, and it has to be different from all your previous pages. It has to have some spark of difference that make. I think that's when we got the money from. I'm trying to remember what that story was about. We've got the money from the From Hell movie, and
this is From Hell for the House. Yeah,
I've given it to my wife, and I've said, "There you go, go out and buy a house," because I've always believed that it's good enough to rent a place. I never considered for a minute that I'd ever buy a house, except I had enough. I was sitting there one day with enough money to buy a house. It wouldn't be enough now, that the way prices have gone up. But anyway, she went out. I said, don't buy the first one you see. Look around until you find one you like. And she went out and bought the first one she saw. We had to then sign on the dotted line. And I said, you know, it's still got a month before that check clears.
And this was in Australia, right?
Yeah. So that point there, which is holding her head in her hands, I've just told her, you know, we've got to wait for a month. You could have spent a month looking for a place, which is what I thought she was going to do. But now we had to lie asleep at nights worrying, like the middle panel, worrying about it for a whole month. I think I was about 40 when we did that. I think what was that? 45. 45, I think we were before I ever thought of buying a house.
Wow. That's how old I am now, 46. I thought I got started late. You got started a little late, but you had all that from hell money pouring in, right? That was just like a limitless dump truck of money, right? They just poured millions of dollars into your lap because you're such a genius.
It had only lately started. I've spent most of my 20s unemployed, and except for the 5 years I worked in a factory. So I've put in my time as a no good waster.
Well, I mean, clearly,
everybody working not that everybody working in a factory is a no good waster, but when I was working in the factory, I was doing the job that was the least demanding. I was doing the job for the new guy. It was always the new guy's job, except that I kept it for 5 years. It was a job that required no experience, and they couldn't understand why I kept doing it. It was because I kept doing it because I didn't have to think. My mind was elsewhere for the whole time I was doing this. My mind was, and also I was reading books. I was just cutting sheet metal into squares, and I was doing this for 5 years. And I got one of the skilled guys to make me a lectern, and I can't remember what I did for him. I wrote a job. I wrote a job inquiry for him or something. I can't remember anyway. He quickly built me a lectern, and there was always a book on it, and I was always studying something. I was studying the history of boxing or something, and I turned that into a book 2 years ago with the Goat Getters. Or I was studying Greek myth, the history of Greek myth, all the books on Greek myth, and I turned that into Bacchus. So it was like 5 years in which I studied everything that would later be of use to me.
There's something to be said for having a job where you can get a paycheck and, mentally multitask.
Just have to turn up and not think about it. That's how I spent my 20s.
Well, and then, so then when you were a courtroom sketcher, was that, I don't know, I just assume that's one of those gigs like sign painter or whatever that artists can pick up to supplement their income or something like that. Or was that, how did that come about?
It's court sketching. I was interested in the guy who was working as my assistant at the time, Pete Mullins, great guy. He's got his own career now. I think he started having his own career. I was having trouble getting him towards the end of things there, but he was doing this thing for one of the TV channels where he was court sketching. I think he did that. He worked with me 4 days, and on his other day he was court sketching for the. Oh no, this was when he was only coming in occasionally for me when I had a big job on. But one of the other channels needed him, and the channel he was working for says, no, you can only work for us. You can't do this for everybody. So he asked me if I wanted to do it, and he put them in contact with me. And it was kind of interesting because it got me out of the house. It got me in the mainstream of human activity where I got to see all the villains in my town. I got to sit near to all the villains and draw them.
Isn't it a little absurd? I always thought that it was kind of crazy that the idea behind the courtroom sketcher, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're not allowed to have photography in the courtroom.
Yeah, it's a tradition that judges don't want photographers. They can't. They could have. I don't think there's a law against it, but generally judges don't want photographers disrupting the solemnness of their court. But journalists have a right to be there, usually in the gallery or whatever. But
sure,
once or twice I was supposed to be in the gallery, and I had to sneak in and pretend I was with the defense team. This was once. The journalist that had got me there to get the sketches said, look, you can't see it from up here. You're going to have to go down there. Just pretend you're with the defense team. Just sit there. You might get the drawing done before they throw you I managed to get enough of a sketch before the judge says, and what are you doing here? Leave my court, young man. Get out of here. And I was thrown out, and I said to the journalist, I says, don't ever do that to me again.
It just seems to me like it's such a more subjective thing. Like you're going to draw the creepy pedophile guy a little creepier, right? Than if you just took him.
He was my local priest. I was sitting there drawing my local parish priest. The times
I know I keep switching back and forth between their books, but the more and more I started thinking about it, the more I realized just how intertwined they are. You could almost, like, if you put the pages in the order that you drew them, you'd almost have to shuffle these four giant books together, right? And really interleave them.
Yeah, probably. They were arranged there for life order rather than work order. I think I'm looking there at the millennium. What we did on Millennium Night.
Well, there's another piece from Hell I wanted to look at, and I had some questions about the Dance of the Gull Catchers, and about where in the chronology that you did the coloring for it, because it seems different. I don't know if it's conscious or it's because it's almost like the documentary, it's like the making of, so it deserves kind of a different style. It just seems more colorful.
Well, because it wasn't set in real time and space. It's set in mental time and space. The gloves were off. We could color that any way we like.
Yeah.
But if you move along a few pages, you see it gets quite vivid.
Oh yes.
It's all metaphor. None of this is happening in real time and space. So we could do it. We could do that any way we liked.
I think that's why this is one of my favorite. My favorite parts are the carriage scene, the opening and closing, the old man at the sea in the beginning, and then of course the Dance of the Gull Catchers is the ultimate. Really sums up the entire project, right? As what it is. As this is not, like you said, it's not a whodunit. It's not about which of these things is right. They're all correct.
And of all the chapters, that one is pure comics. You know that.
Yeah. Yes.
That's being created on the page there. You know, it's not. We might be referring to something anecdotally, but what you're saying there is a story that doesn't exist anywhere else, except as we created it on that page. Like that guy we're just looking at who falls dead face forward in the mud. He probably died in his bed. He only falls face forward in the mud in our story. And the mud doesn't exist. It's a metaphorical mud.
Uh-huh. I especially loved the parts about Robert Lee's the psychic, and that he made up all his prophecies, but they came true anyway. What's your take on that? That is one of the weirdest sleights of hand of the entire book, in my opinion.
That's one of the first that happens right in the prologue. That we first see that in the prologue, and it's at that point you know that this is an Alan Moore book. This is not a documentary.
Yes,
that it's one of Alan's first inventions. That he's a fake psychic, but he saw it accidentally.
That's what's mind-blowing, because and ultimately he implicates the true murder because he insulted him. Really, it's out of just sort of petty spite for him.
Yeah,
that he implicates him. It's amazing.
That he turned out to be the murderer was more a surprise to the psychic than
yes.
Else.
Amazing. Okay, this, like I said, this is pure comics. It's so meta, contextual, but yet so readable moment to moment. It's a fun read. I just reread it for the first time in years, and the color just popped out at me amongst all the color of the rest of the book. This seemed to be so. I'll ask you again: did you do this in order? Did you do this last after coloring the book?
It was after. We did that after. Yeah. Ken Gerleeve, who did the design in the book, did most of the color on this chapter. With the instruction to have fun with it.
What I kind of love too about the whole concept of the Dance of the Gull Catchers and everybody like unearthing old theories again and bringing them back up and layering on top. You guys are now so part of that. It's ridiculous, right? Like nobody is going to talk about Jack the Ripper like, how has this book, if you know, gone over in like ripperology circles?
Oh, I don't know. I've no idea. I don't follow that stuff. I've no idea.
I wonder if like they accepted, like if they're insulted by this sort of last chapter, sort of like calling all of their work nonsense.
A Mason wrote to me once and said he enjoyed it. He said,
That's good to know.
He said we had a discussion about this last night. He was letting me know everybody enjoyed it.
Oh, cool! At the lodge, they talked about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So one last thing I had to bring up about From Hell, and the entire conceit of Gull's mission, right? Yeah. To sort of, it's a magical spell to sort of complete the transference of male dominance over what used to be sort of a female-dominated world and theology and what have you. The mother gods were millions of years old, and the male gods are only a few thousand years old. This is a magical spell. And when I first read it, I go, what? It seems weird. This doesn't seem like something that could, like anybody would want to do. But then I started thinking about the moon mission and why the U.S. NASA's mission to the moon with this phallic symbol to conquer the moon and plant a flag in, why was it named after the sun god? And why was it all these Nazi scientists that were contributing? Like, I started really tripping out on that idea. Is that something that you guys ever discussed or you ever talked about? Because it seems so connected.
I never thought about it until you just said.
Oh, man.
I never noticed.
I never did either until I read this book and thought about it, right? And I've looked it up. I haven't seen anybody else really talk about that. But the idea, like, if you take this book and what Gull did as a metaphor and a magic spell to do what he did, it's not that far of a leap to look at the symbolism of the moon mission and say it's an extension of the same thing.
Interesting.
All right, so maybe not. All right, maybe not as interesting as I thought. But my favorite piece of the remaster and the part that made me just instantly glad is the end papers.
Yeah, the front ones are different from the end ones, but
yes,
there were enough characters in the book to fill the 4 pages up.
What order are they? Are they in order of appearance or anything, or just prominence, or?
They're not in order. Kind of. There's a kind of order to them. I think who's at the top there, for instance. I think Fred, and Gull, and Eddie.
Yeah. The main players, I think. Yeah,
probably an order of, and then the women come down next, going down. Yeah, so they're probably an order of importance, I suppose.
Oh, the Elephant Man parts, so great. Such a weird character. Were you guys worried that just people would just straight up not be able to understand what he was saying in that dialogue? It's not easy to understand what he's saying.
Dave Sim is in one of Dave Sim. He's got me talking with a Scottish accent that's much harder to understand than the elephant than Alan Moore's.
True. But it's hard enough because you have to translate it through like accent and physical deformity to sort of figure out what he's saying. I don't know, it was tricky for me. Yeah, I had the same problem with the Scottish character in V for Vendetta. The Scottish hitman guy is like ridiculous.
Yeah, I think Alan he'd stuck things in his mouth and distorted himself, and then read what he wanted to be said and transcribed it as it came out. Yeah, I think it worked. I think he had to act it to figure out how it would sound. What did they call that acting? Was it the I forgot.
Method acting.
He's a method comicer.
And finally, we finish it off with the three most important, probably, save for the very end.
Or Jabulon.
Yeah.
Or Jablonski, as we call him in this house. We've even
incredible book.
We've even get the guy. Yeah, we've even got Netley's horse in there, and the guy fought money because there was a couple of medallions that I still had to fill, and I thought, who have we missed? Oh, Netley's horse, he'll do.
Well, to tell you the truth, like Netley, such a great character, and Aberline the detective is the one that always surprises me the most about just the painting of this real guy. Like I could see leaving him out of the book. It would be the worst for it because of his importance in the book and that personal story. But you could leave it out. You could see cutting it out and it wouldn't materially affect it as much. But man, it's such a great emotional piece at the heart of his misogyny and hatred of women. Kind of echoes the rest of the story.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. So this was the master edition of From Hell. We looked at it side by side here with the color edition. And you, Eddie, hang on. I want to go back into the studio, and I want to open it up to any questions. We got some comments here from the people. Let's see, not too many. Let's see. Oh, from Matt Mansell, who said the From Hell movie was basically a remake of Murder by Decree without having Sherlock Holmes in the story. And this Matt Mansell, an old buddy of mine, and I remember him telling. I never saw that movie, but he's a big fan of those films. Did you ever hear that before?
From Hell movie was basically a remake of. Yes, it is. Is that the one with Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah, that's what he said. And they pulled Sherlock Holmes out and put in Johnny Depp. Like I could see him as Aberline or I could see him as Lees, but the combo, I don't know.
And then there's the other one with Michael Caine. That was quite similar. That I forgot that with that. That was just Jack the Ripper, I think, wasn't it?
Oh yes.
I think that used the same theory.
I'm just gonna fluff you up a little bit here, Eddie.
There's three movies based on the Masonic cover-up theory. Oh, thank you very much. If they just done it like the book, they would have had a different movie. But I don't think Hollywood thrives on being different. Thrive on being
as much as true. I just the odds against getting a work adapted, a great work like yours, like that adapted, is just such a missed opportunity. My lips are sealed. Nice Bruce homage, Ryan Claytor.
Thank you. Yes,
Ryan, very talented artist in his own right. He draws comics. He makes neon signs and custom watches as well. Very talented guy. He's been on the show before. Okay. Dr. Ben Anthony says, I'm interested to know what sort of reception Mr. Campbell has gotten from the so-called Ripper. Oh, I already asked this question, Dr. Ben.
Yeah. I really don't know. Well, they're only interested in it from the point of view of what does it contribute to the knowledge of the Ripper. And so they're apt to discredit it for things that have nothing to do with it being what it is. There were things like that I wanted to fix. For instance, Mary Kelly's room was much more. It did in the arrangement of it, where the bed is in relation to the door, and also I got wrong, and it also seemed much too big. In the room was too spacious in the original From Hell. There's a better From Hell cover. I never liked the way that one with the hat and the grapes was printed. It was much too dark. But one of the things that I fixed in this rejigging of the whole thing is that I've made the room larger. No, I've made the figures larger and therefore the room smaller. I've brought the background closer to the figures. The room is much smaller and tighter in the color version than it was in the original. There's much more of a what's a fear of small tight spaces? What's it?
Claustrophobia. Yeah.
There's more. It's a more claustrophobic room than it very quickly fills with steam and smoke and sweat.
And blood and fire.
There's a much horrible, more claustrophobic space than somebody's colorized the photo than it was in. That's a rather. I don't know where that photo came from. It's nicely done. Than it was in the original black and white. If you look at those pictures in comparison, if you get time, the room. You can see that I've moved things around just to work that idea of it being a more claustrophobic room.
It's interesting because never having thought about it, when I think about that scene in the old book anyway, I always kind of thought like, man, they've got a pretty spacious room for whatever they're paying for this thing. Like,
yeah,
it's almost like the set of Friends, right? They've got this apartment in New York or whatever, but they
yeah,
know it.
That's one of the things that I really attended to in the new edition. It works much better. That's
amazing, Eddie. I think a lot of people will be content to rest on their laurels and rest on a book that's lauded as much as yours is. And it is lauded as much for your artwork, I think, as it is for the writing. It's the perfect synthesis to tell this story, right? So to see you going back and obsessing over little details like that, it surprises me a little bit.
Yeah, I can't look at it without wanting to change something. In fact, it's now over a year since I handed in the color one, so I can't look at that without wanting to change things. I don't want to redraw it because I don't have 10 years to give. I don't have years to give to it anymore. But I've spent 2 years colorizing it and fixing all those things. But that's it. That's my final statement.
You had your chance now, Eddie. Anything else is sour grapes. Come on, no.
It's a better book now. If I looked at it before, I'd want to fall out with myself. I can't live with that Campbell. I don't know what to do. I'll have to do damage to him or something.
Okay, so Eddie, what's next for Eddie Campbell? What's on the horizon for you, comics wise?
I've got a book. I don't know if you saw that book I did a couple of years ago, The Goat Getters, which is a book of sort of history of an aspect of cartoons that's never been written about before.
No.
The Goat Getters. It's a book about.
Who published it?
IDW. It's a book about the sports page. Because many of the sports page really begins in San Francisco. There's a whole San Francisco school of cartooning that has its own way of doing things and its own ideas and its own line of interesting slang. Like To Get Somebody's Goat comes from a sports cartoon by Tad Dorgan. And the first the earliest daily comics, more or less, come from the sports page. They don't begin there exactly, but they get a particular rough house element, an adult view of things. See, the color funnies were always given to the kids.
Yes.
But the more serious, I don't mean serious, usually like one of Tad's cartoons was called, one of his comics was called Silk Hat Harry's Divorce Suit. I mean things that you don't put in the kids' comics.
Yeah.
Barney Google started on the sports pages. Crazy Cat started on the sports pages.
I didn't know that. Barney Google, I know, has horse race connection. I didn't know about Crazy Cat.
He's definitely a sports page character. But But Harriman's Family Upstairs started as a fill-in on the sports page when Ted Dorgan was out, because he was the main guy. He was the guy everybody wanted to be. When Ted was out of town to cover the Johnson Jeffries fight in 1910, Harriman got to fill in on Ted's spot, and he created this running comic called The Family Upstairs, and underneath it, under the floorboards in the basement, he created this little cat and mouse comic, which became Crazy Cat. It got its own title, it got its own series. The Crazy Cat first appears on the sports pages of the New York Journal, William Randolph Hearst New York Journal. And that really is the story. It's a big story, the Goat Getters. It's a story.
And in fact, the last panel of Alec
is the break.
It's a Harriman tribute.
Yeah, it's Harriman's break. Yeah. Gift wrapped.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Also love this picture. I meant to clip this one.
That exists as a color picture. There was almost going to be an Alec TV series.
That blew my mind.
In Australia, there, we made a little 2.5 minute demo, and that's really all that exists. But we got some development funding, and we wrote 2 whole scripts and summaries of 4 other parts. It was gonna be 6 or 8 part half-hour TV show.
That's amazing.
I don't know who was going to be playing me, but I was playing it in the demo in the hope that they couldn't get anybody as good as me.
It would have had to been who? Billy Connolly
to play
in his prime.
But that photo came from the photo shoot where they had a leaflet that was part of the package that we took to the television people.
Right. Well, that's the series we wish we had seen. You know, I interviewed a cartoonist who got a series on Hulu just this year about his life. Oh, yeah? Keith Knight did a series called Woke on Hulu, and it's all about him and his cartooning.
Good for him. I hope he survives. I hope he survives it. I hope he
really excellent series too. I did an interview with him, and it got picked up for a second season on Hulu and stuff too. It's got JB Smoove and a bunch of other Cedric the Entertainer, I think, some other cool actors in it. So there's hope, Eddie. There's hope. Let's bring this concept back. This is the streaming age. They're throwing series deals at everybody.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen.
I don't know.
Who needs that when you got the respect of, I'm going to say, millions of fans, and the people that like your work are the people that truly appreciate great cartooning, great art. They're not just fans of superhero comics or something. They're fans of the art form. I know you're not big into the term graphic novel, but I think you're a world-class cartoonist.
Who said that?
I was just reading that in Alec. You were talking about that in one of the
that comes and goes. But my wife Audrey, they're turning the Time Traveler's Wife into an HBO series. So we've got TV happening in this house. Oh,
fantastic!
Steve Moffat from Doctor Who and Frankenstein is the man behind the TV series of Audrey's book.
Great. To tell you the truth, the one that has the commercial potential, I could see a Bacchus. I could see a live-action Bacchus adaptation easily. That'd be great.
Bacchus, yeah, now and then there's been a nibble, but it's not gone anywhere.
Yeah.
It's got all the elements.
Well,
it's got all those super elements.
I think it's going to come. It could happen in the next wave when they have fully tired of the standard superhero stuff. They're sort of into the hyper-violent post-Frank Miller stuff now, but they have not explored the wider world of Bacchus, Flaming Carrot, whatever, Reed Fleming.
The Eyeball Kid would have a great cinematic presence. They could, and
Agreed.
they've got the technology to do that correctly now. They didn't have 15 years ago, but I think they do now.
Well, we can hope, Eddie. We can hope. But, you know, even without that, I've got close to 1,200 pages of Eddie Campbell comics right here that I can enjoy again and again and again. I want to thank you for
1,200. There's 1,200 in Bacchus. Then there's 600.
1,200.
No, 600.
Oh.
I think it's 600 in From Hell. I've done thousands of little. When you think that there's 9 pictures on a page, I've done thousands of little pictures, and every little picture must be different from every little picture before it, and
yeah,
every little picture must. I was thinking this as I was drawing the new one, the second fake death of Eddie Campbell by Eddie Campbell. That's the full title, by the way. I was thinking this as I was doing panels in there. And I think because of this, things don't get quicker. Things take longer than they used to do. It takes longer to draw a comic panel than it ever did before, because I'm hyper aware of every panel that has preceded it, and this must advance the argument. It must advance the game somehow. It must be. You can't be better than every single picture you've ever done, but it must throw down a challenge to every previous picture. It must be a composite. Every picture must be a composition that stands in its own right. It can't just be a rehash or a photostat of an earlier composition. Everyone must be new. So it just takes longer and longer.
Well, and if it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in the subject, according to some Yahoo, I mean, you must be one many times over at this point with that many thousands of pages under your belt.
Oh, and the other thing is, this is my first. This will be my first autobiographical comic since The Lovely Horrible Stuff.
Right.
Although I did do a 6-page story in a humanoids anthology called The Tipping Point. Usually when I talk about it, I forget that it was the humanoids who published it. It's my only ever connection with whoever the humanoids are. I didn't get to meet all of them.
I know Mark Waid is involved with them now these days.
But it was
That's the only one I know.
It was a 6-page thing in color, and it was the one where I kind of finally understood how to do computer coloring, because I didn't really understand it yet in The Lovely Horrible Stuff, which works, but I didn't entirely understand what I was doing there. And when I look at it now, I want to redo it, The Lovely Horrible Stuff. But the cul-de-sac was the first one in which it's the story. It begins when I've just lost the cat. My wife and I have separated. I've got through the separation. I've found a flat, and everything was all right. I'm surviving well, but then I lost the cat, and that's supposed to be the tipping point of the title.
Oh my gosh!
But when they got it, they said, "We don't understand. We don't understand what you're doing when you're doing." And I got all upset. I got all upset because I'm a diva artist. Anyway, it's the story of when I lost. It's the story of when
I'm looking forward. When is that coming out? When is that one coming out?
Which one? The new one?
Yes.
The tipping point was 4 or 5 years ago, but the new one next year probably.
Next year.
It's about. The introduction says it's about the COVID year, because I'm thinking, when this comes out, we'll be looking back and thinking, oh yes, the COVID year. I think it's going to...
Might be the COVID decade, pal. The way it's shaping up.
It's still going to be with us. We're into the next COVID year.
We haven't gotten into the Gamma or the Zeta variants or whatever is coming down the chute.
We're only up to Delta. We're going to go through the alphabet.
Well, Eddie, I got to thank you. I have to get out of here now for work, but I've got
You've got a life.
I got a life, believe it or not. But I also have the lovely, horrible stuff on order. I'm really just being a fan of yourself and the history of money. I really can't wait to read it. Do you talk about the Pillars of Hercules in there?
No.
Okay. I wanted to.
It's mostly another Alec book. But Alec happens to go to the island of Yap for
Okay, great.
For 50 pages. But otherwise, it's business as usual. It's
okay. Well,
it's
that's what we're looking for when it comes to Alec. It's musings, but in a style that like is eminently readable. That's the thing that amazes me that you can pull off. Because when I look at these things, I look at this book and I go, if you look at it at first blush and tell the story and sort of what it is, it's hard to understand. But until you start reading it, it really does transport you. This, like Gold Catchers, to me reads like pure comics, especially the later stuff, where it's just a completely imaginary construct. It's virtual reality on paper, and it's amazing.
Well, thank you.
Eddie, thank you so much. I hope maybe you'll come back sometime, talk about your new work and promote your new book when it's ready.
Yeah, love to. Thank you,
Awesome.
Dan. This has been fun.
Good. I'm glad. That's all I'm striving for. So thank you. I'm going to do the outro here. I do some credits, a quick outro, and then I'm out of here. If you got time to stick around, feel free. If not, I understand, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, and thank you if you're still sticking around for checking this thing out. Where do we want to go? Back here. So thank you for checking out Eddie Campbell. Am I the only one inspired by the work ethic of this guy? I mean, I'm looking at a book that I considered pure genius, and he's talking about subtle changes that obviously took a lot of time and effort that I might not have noticed. I didn't notice on first blush. But when you go back and look at him, you can say, oh, yeah, he improved it. Now, I don't know. I'm looking for anything in my life that people laud as a visionary work of genius. And I don't know that I'm going to go back and tweak the elements like that. To me, that's the eye of a perfectionist, to care about whether this view is from across the river or whether that bridge existed at the time of the scene in question. That's just taking authenticity to another level. That the nerd inside of me loves so much. So thank you for checking out Eddie Campbell today. Who we got next time? I don't know. I don't have them lined up exactly yet, but I've got some nibbles from Eddie's publisher. Chris Staros has agreed to come in sometime in November. Gene Yang is going to make a return back here, fresh off his 2 or 3 Eisner wins. And who else? I want to bring some retailers back in to talk about the scene and how much has changed in the comic book retailing and distribution universe, because believe me, 2020 and 2021 are like apocalypse times for the comics industry. That doesn't mean it's going away. That just means it's going through dramatic change. So thanks for watching. Stick around, watch these closing credits, and stick around at the very end for a little cameo. Like any good comic book movie, at the end of the credits, you get a cameo. So stick around and check them out, and we'll see you next time.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, the destroyer